what was it like working with him? Just out of curiosity, I'd love to add something in my report if it's easily to be able to, something that's worthwhile to add. And he told me he's an elite learner, that his translating from the whiteboard to the field is unlike anything that he's worked with players. And he's not just worked with high school and college talent. He's also done some work last year in the offseason with Trevor Lawrence.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Matt Waldman on the show. He has been on the show every April for the last 2 years because he is the creator of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. This is a go-to reference for his scouting analysis of skill-based players like quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. Among other topics, we talk about the quarterback in the 2023 NFL draft class that is wildly overrated. We talk about the quarterback that might seem overhyped, but really isn't. And we also talk about skill development for all football players. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be three things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. Every Saturday, I send out a curated list of sports betting tips and analytics. As we get closer to football season, I'll be sending out more of my analysis on college football and the NFL. To check out this free service, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting advice through data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Matt Waldman. He's the creator of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. He's also a senior writer at Football Guys and one of my favorite guests on this podcast. Matt, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I always look forward to doing this. So we're gonna have a good time getting to chat it up on 420 here today.
Absolutely. Matt, can you start by giving us a little bit of a sense for what the Rookie Scouting Portfolio is and how you got started doing it?
Sure. I was an operations manager and eventually a quality director at a large company that had about 10,000 employees. And I eventually learned, I did a lot of recruiting, training, and development of people, both on the front lines and managerial lines of the work that we did, and then eventually transitioned into the quality sector because I had a really great track record for high productivity and high quality work, and then eventually got certified in a process that was designed for a number of different things. But one of the things that the certification included was best practices and how to evaluate performance of your employees. And a lot of the things that I learned with that, I transitioned over to evaluating football talent because it really was about a process that was designed to define things in writing, give proper weighting of scoring, to reduce variation in evaluation of subjective formats and or subjective things, and then to consistently grow, continuous growth through identifying where there's gaps in what your process is trying to measure, as well as identifying gaps in what it is that's defined so that you can make, better definitions of the criteria you're looking at. So I applied that to evaluating football back in 2005, came out with the Rookie Scouting Portfolio in 2006. And the Rookie Scouting Portfolio essentially is an evaluation process used for quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. I evaluate about 150 prospects minimum every year. I've been doing it since 2006. It's one of the two most purchased independent draft guides by NFL scouts and NFL people who are in the evaluation space, according to folks like SMU's director of recruiting, Alex Brown, who meets with these guys every day as a part of his job and gets to ask them, what independent products do you purchase? What do you look at? And he's been telling me that for years, working as a recruiting director at Rice before that, and then with Tom Herman at Houston when Houston was on the come up. So the RSP takes you through my evaluation process. You get to see in a transparent way how I define everything, how I weight the scoring. And I use two different scoring formats, one to supply for my rankings and one to just give you an idea of a different dimension of how you score talent, which I look at breadth of talent and depth of talent. And breadth is really all the things that you could possibly do that would be defined for that position. And depth of talent is how well you actually do it. Because there's a lot of players in this league who, like Elijah Mitchell is a good example of a player who has a very narrow breadth of talent, but has a good enough depth of talent that if you match him with the right system, he's going to produce at a higher level or a high enough level to contribute, if not start. So I take you through all that. I give you rankings as well, just shorthand table rankings, as well as in-depth scouting profiles based on, looking at those players. And, you can get it for $21.95 at mountwaldman.com. And part of that price also gets you a post-draft product, which I looked specifically at a fantasy angle of where these guys fit, depth chart analysis, a cheat sheet that gives you tiers as well as a value designation, a sweet spot designation. So, for instance, if I liked, say, Patrick Mahomes more than Mitchell Trubisky, but Mitchell Trubisky was rated higher, then I'm not going to tell you to draft Patrick Mahomes number one overall, even if I think he's the best player in the draft. I'm going to show you where you can get him at a value where you're not going to get sniped most likely to take him, but you're still going to reap a little bit more value than just drafting him number one overall. So I show you, basically versus ADP that I'm tracking, where my post-draft value is versus that, and whether you're either going to have to reach a little bit to get them based on my rankings, or you can wait, 5 picks, 15 picks, 25 picks, whatever it is. And you get all that for $21.95 plus a newsletter at mattwaldman.com.
I highly recommend it. I find myself reading more and more of it every year to get a sense for players and guys coming in the league. So I highly recommend it. Matt, did you play fantasy football? Like, was that part of, like, before you started RSP, did you play fantasy football? And was that your motivation to start looking at film for skill position players?
It was. I started playing fantasy football, I think around 1994, 1995. I was at work like most everybody else. And, I had some friends who were in some fantasy football leagues, who were in a work fantasy league. And so they invited me. I played. I got hooked pretty quickly. I think my first 2 picks were Jerry Rice and Ricky Waters, and then Terrell Davis was my 3rd round pick.
That's not too bad
as a second year player when he took off. So yeah, I had a good season. I'll put it that way. I won money, had a strong year, and I remember getting hooked with that and played in this league for a long time. And a lot of those guys were like old time fantasy guys. Like some of them ended up did some writing for like the old KFFL news feeds. They were doing that before I got into the industry, and doing some writing like that. But I started writing at fftoday.com, Mike Kruger's site with Mike McGregor, back in 2003. And before that, I did a little bit of work for Football Guys, and David Dodds had said, "Hey, do you want to do more?" And I just kind of ghosted him and thought, I don't really want to do this. It was back in 99. I think I did some stuff. But as I started getting into it, I realized that I had a pretty good knack for rookies. I was writing about guys like Brian Westbrook and Larry Fitzgerald and Brandon Lloyd and a number of different players who were getting drafted and saying, these are guys you need to keep an eye on, and here's why, and looking at both the stats and then also a little bit about the film. But I felt like I really wanted to get better at studying film, because it seemed to me that was the angle I was most interested in, because I always loved watching football. And so, seeing seeing thinking about the certification that I was doing. I mean, I've been building databases for this company, with all this, putting out all this criterion, defining and spending my days looking at how you evaluate employee performance in a subjective seeming environment and reducing variation and, all of that. I started thinking to myself, I could do this with football talent. Why not give it a shot? So that's how it was born. It was really about that. But I wanted always to make it a football first, with then I can add the fantasy to it. And if I kept it to football, then I felt like that could give it the biggest possible room for growth.
Absolutely. Do you ever feel, I mean, obviously you don't really have that much time to watch tape on other players, but if you had more time, like, would it interest you to look at defensive linemen and cornerbacks and things that don't matter for fantasy?
Absolutely. Like when I was on Ross Tucker's show for a year, I did that. And, but I didn't do it for the RSP, but I would do that for those guys. Or when I was writing for Football Outsiders and I started their futures column that I think is still going today. I was kind of the author and creator of that column. I would look at defensive players. And I enjoy that. It's just that, there's just no time to be able to do it. If there were 56 hours in a day, then maybe I would have a chance to be able to do that. And I still only needed 4 hours of sleep, then that would probably be all right.
Matt, let's dig into the 2023 NFL draft. There is a consensus out there that there will be 4 quarterbacks taken in the first round. Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, and Will Levis. You kind of disagree on one. So tell us what you are seeing with Will Levis.
Yeah, it's really a lot of, it's a combination of what I'm seeing that what we don't really want to see. And
right.
And here's the thing, Will Levis, maybe he turns into a Josh Allen type of exception to the rule and really develops at a high level. But let's start with the difference between Josh Allen and Will Levis. Right. Josh Allen always had decent footwork. Josh Allen could really climb a pocket well and maneuver in a pocket and make some really awesome throws when he was in rhythm. And you could see that he saw the field reasonably well in a lot of situations, but he had a lot of hero throws in his game where he tried to force targets that he really shouldn't have, or he would get off kilter when one bad play happened. He would push harder to try and make a better play the next time. And it would usually be one of those things where you just got yourself in quicksand because you're pressing too much. The things that he needed to work on were really more about managing the game. Will Levis, the things he needs to work on are more fundamental than that. So one of the things that you see right off the bat is that his footwork, while correctable, it's something that it takes time to ingrain it. And if you already have an NFL caliber or a guy with an NFL track record as a quarterback coach, and you still haven't worked on the fundamental of just like your throwing motion where your feet need to be where they're supposed to be. His back foot, the midline of it, should be facing the target of where the target's going to break towards. And then the front toe should be pointed also at where the target's going to be. That's kind of your baseline accuracy, your back foot. Your point, the point of the front toe is more like the refined area in terms of where your feet should be. What happens with him is that his back foot is where the target is and not where it's going to be. And his front toe is somewhere off in space at the sideline. And when he tries to throw, he tries to like take his both feet and snap them into the spot where they're supposed to be as he's releasing the ball. Doesn't quite work out very well. And you can see that the accuracy is good enough for the college game. But like Baker Mayfield, Baker Mayfield had great statistical accuracy from a box score perspective, completion percentage. Right. But when you actually chart his games and you use you're charting to what the NFL standard is of what pinpoint accuracy should be, his accuracy was not nearly as good. In contrast, a guy like Lamar Jackson or Anthony Richardson, who we'll talk about later, had better pinpoint accuracy or better accuracy overall when you chart it versus what the box score actually says. And so Levis has that problem. When you look, the accuracy isn't really pinpoint for what you should chart for. And then on top of that, the processing speed, and S2 is getting a bigger and bigger name these days. They're kind of what I would call a step in the right direction away from the Wonderlic and towards what really matters with quarterbacking and in the mental side of the game, which isn't, you want to have a baseline level of recall of plays and being able to look at things structurally on a whiteboard. But what you also want to have that's more important once you get on the field is the ability to integrate a lot of different skills into executing in a timely manner based on what you're seeing in front of you. And that timely confidence is very important. And that's what good processing is. And Will Levis, like Baker Mayfield or Alex Smith, who was known as a very intelligent dude, but book smart intelligence is different than on field intelligence.
Right.
Evidenced by guys who performed poorly under Wonderlic, like Steve McNair and Dan Marino, who were MVP players. So when you look at Will Levis, he's 1 to 3 beats late from when he should identify the leverage point to begin the throw and when he actually throws the ball. And that's something that's a very key part of what's the difference between a lot of my rankings of quarterbacks in the past 3 to 4 years, maybe even 5, versus a lot of other people's rankings during then. And that's differentiated, like, for me, guys like Brock Purdy and Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, and versus guys like Mitchell Trubisky, Zach Wilson, Drew Lock, and Will Levis, who just isn't even in my top 10, because those two areas, processing is hard to teach. It's hard to develop. If you don't already have it at this stage, then, that's not a good thing. So when I look at him, I see him as a borderline NFL quarterback, not a borderline starter or borderline backup, a borderline NFL quarterback.
Right. That's when I watch Will Levis, he seems completely lost, and and I feel like he's getting the hype because he looks the part in terms of his size and arm strength and all that.
And just real quick, this is the NFL when they say they're going to project 4 quarterbacks. Well, historically, there's going to be at least half the league that isn't really keen on understanding how much processing is important to the degree it is when picking, and they're going to look at the body as opposed to the mind.
Right, exactly. But I will like to point out that, I thought the opposite of Baker Mayfield. I thought in college he looked great. He looked accurate, I guess, in the games that I saw, and clearly the box score was amazing given what they were doing at Oklahoma. I presume you had Baker Mayfield higher than you would have Will Levis now, but you certainly weren't as high on him to be the number 1 overall pick, right? This you would argue is like the value of watching the film, like you do.
Yes, and charting games, because what you're looking for is with Baker Mayfield, I think I had him rated 6th maybe in that class, and I had him comp to Jeff Garcia. Like, if everything works out, he's like could be a Pro Bowl player with great surrounding talent on him, but he's not the guy. He's not an elite quarterback. He's not Russell Wilson, Drew Brees, and Brett Favre combined, like people were saying. And the difference is this: is that a guy can look accurate in the college game, but if you're not projecting to what is a pinpoint throw based on this route, based on where the coverage will be in the NFL when it's at its best, not what it is in other games. And a good game that really actually showed off what Baker Mayfield wasn't was the Rose Bowl against Georgia, where Georgia had pro caliber athletes playing tight man-to-man coverage in the second half of the game, and you could see the throws where Baker Mayfield struggled, and then the team also cut off the edges of the pocket. So he had to climb the pocket, and that combination of not being able to climb the pocket versus being late against man-to-man coverage, those are things that you see a lot in the NFL, and you saw it elsewhere on his tape, but it was more isolated because teams couldn't play man-to-man at the level Georgia could, because, the Big 12 was in terms of the caliber of football talent there versus the SEC was slightly different. And that slight difference made a big difference in the NFL. It's kind of like if you're off by a decimal point with the moon landing, you're going to be out and lost in space. It's the same kind of thing when you're projecting with quarterback accuracy.
When you say climb the pocket, do you mean moving towards the line of scrimmage to avoid pressure within the pocket?
That's correct. Yes. And when you want to see pocket movement, really what you'd like to see is a quarterback who can climb the pocket with measured steps in a timely manner where their feet stay under their shoulders so that they can get rid of the ball quickly. Running to a spot, dropping your eyes, holding the ball out away from your body, anything like that can get in the way from you being efficient.
Interesting. And I presume Bryce Young is a quarterback that's good at climbing the pocket.
He is. He can climb the pocket. He is obviously a smaller guy, so he has to be on his tippy toes. He has to be able to have wide open lanes to be able to throw through. You don't throw over the pocket as much as you throw between it anyway, but he's good at that, and he's much more efficient. Like he's a more efficient form of what Kyler Murray would hope to be in the pocket, and Murray's a good quarterback.
Matt, let's move on. Anthony Richardson's stock soared after the NFL Combine. You can see his draft odds going up and up and up. But you've been on, his game since before that with the tape. So tell us about Anthony Richardson and your analysis of him.
Yeah, in addition to the accuracy, you have the pocket climbing, the ability to climb efficiently in the pocket, and he's strong and quick. So he's very good at being able to avoid or work through pressure if he needs to with either dynamic movement or that efficient movement that you see from Brady, or even Bryce Young that you see with top quarterbacks. But in addition to being able to climb the pocket, in addition to being more accurate than what the stats, the box score stats actually say, and there's other people who've charted games and keep a database, and I can't remember who it is. I need to say that credit them, but they have a database that goes back into the 1980s, if not before. And the only player who had more drops during his college starts when charting for them, other than Anthony Richardson, the one with more was Dan Marino. So that's pretty good company. I saw the same thing with Lamar Jackson, where his accurate percentage looked bad, but you could see that it was better when you charted it, because it was a lot of drops or just,
right.
So with Richardson, it's not just the pocket movement. It's not just the better accuracy than stated. It's the fact that when you look at most quarterbacks, and you're going to see it in the draft or how people are played up, you look at the Trubiskys, the Mayfields, the Locks, the Zach Wilsons who get loved on, as well as players who actually had good careers. You're going to see them cited in college as saying, watch how he climbs that pocket, or watch how he layers a throw over a linebacker and under a safety, or watch how he can fit this ball into a tight window of coverage, and watch how he can throw on the move and do that. And usually what they're showing is isolated instances of like one good thing, but the rest of the play doesn't require a lot of integration of different skills. When you look at Anthony Richardson, a lot of his tape shows him climbing the pocket, manipulating cornerbacks and linebackers at the same time while he's making that climb to fit the ball over a linebacker and under a safety into a tight window of three defenders, only where the receiver can catch it. So you're looking at 4 or 5 things that I just mentioned integrated into one play. And you can see that on several plays on his tape that show advanced skill sets. It's one thing to say, people say he's raw, but I'll put it this way. You and I have been driving for a little while. It's one thing to drive in the United States. And we could even say it's one thing to drive like in Iowa, in a rural part of Iowa. And it's a different thing to be driving in LA or in downtown New York.
Yep.
And it's vastly different thing to be driving, say, in a country like Jamaica. I had been driving for 14 years when I first stepped foot into Jamaica, and Jamaica's, they drive on the opposite side of the road than the U.S. the car, so that means that the steering wheel's on the opposite side of the road. It means there's roundabouts, which wasn't something that was common in the U.S. until the past 10 years in most places. So there were more roundabouts. There were potholes the size of basically craters, that they joke that were actually potholes. The way people drive close together is much tighter. The way you signal is different. And then the first day that I was driving a pickup truck that had that was a manual pickup truck, which I could drive manual, but it had a gear shift. The manual was on the gear shift on the steering column with your left hand, not your right hand, on the floorboard. And that was my first day. And I had to drive through hills and hilly country to help move stuff on my first day, my first hour in Jamaica. And I had skills on how to drive a manual. I've driven through the mountains with a manual stick shift because my dad taught me up in Colorado. I did my driving test with just a standard, an automatic, no stick shift. Been driving for years. I had driven some trucks. I had driven pickup trucks. I had done, some things like that. So I was by all experiences a decent driver. But, but at the same time, I didn't understand the culture of driving in Jamaica, how people use their horn, different things that made it more. I had more embarrassing moments. Unfortunately, nothing that killed me, or killed anybody else. But it was a harder thing, and it took an adjustment. That's Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson, the skills that are hard to teach, such as not being maybe not being as distracted of a driver, someone who can actually parallel park well, who handles a vehicle really well, can handle different types of vehicles and do it in a way with good timing and all, the thing. Some people never get a stick shift right. Mm-hmm. So the timing is important. The ability to really integrate all these different skills, that's hard to teach. The easy thing to teach is the rules of the Jamaican road. You just needed some time to do it. But if you just get dropped in there and asked to do it, you're going to look silly in the same way on a field where he may try and make a hero throw that he shouldn't have, or throw into cover 2 and get a pick 6 because it's his first full season as a starter, and the way they disguised cover 2 he didn't recognize, or it was a quick check and he forgot that he had cover 2, something like that. So people call him raw, but they really shouldn't. They should just say he's inexperienced with certain things that he's going to get better at. Whereas a Mitchell Trubisky, if Mitchell Trubisky were a driver, and he probably would have wrecked his car, he probably would have gotten someone hurt, or he would have totally stripped the gears on the transmission, trying to do that, because certain things that he was good at, that he wasn't good at, weren't going to translate well to that other environment.
So Anthony Richardson is driving the crazy car in Jamaica under crazy conditions, and that's something that's rare from what you've seen.
Yeah, it's rare. His ability to manipulate different, the defenders in the short and intermediate range of the field while climbing the pocket and being able to throw on the move with placement and things, and how would I put it? Layering throws like Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes or all the top quarterbacks. He can do all those things. The things that he doesn't do well are just trying to do a little Matthew Stafford hero stuff early in his career. Things that you can tamper back. And notice I didn't mention that he has a 10 RAS score. He's unbelievably big, strong, fast, and can run, and has stamina. I'm telling you what he is as a quarterback. You could, if he was Phillip Rivers as an athlete, I would tell you right now, he'd still be a very promising passer that it shouldn't be drafted any later than the second round. Wow.
Do you have any sense for how Richardson learned this, or is it just instinctual and has the brain? You talk about elite instinctual learning when you wrote about Richardson. Is that just his brain that allows him to do that, or is it his coaching?
I think it's a combination of factors. I mean, it's one of those things. One is it's how, and this is what we're trying to learn more about when it comes to any field of evaluating performance. One of the things is it's a combination of how he grew up, what his baseline intellect and skills were for being able to basically transition from like theoretical knowledge to practical knowledge, and probably the environment that he was in that helped him really practice that and get good at it. And so that's part of it. And then there was, so I think he was probably encouraged in those ways. And I think that some people just have a better knack for that and maybe knew how to practice the right way to do it. Oftentimes when we get people who get lessons, and he didn't get all the quarterback lessons that the suburban kids get in the same way that, the Felicity Hussmans of the world, were able to game, I'm kidding. But, the way kids get the SAT prep, and work on all of that. Well, he didn't get that, suburban high school, quarterback coaching, but whatever it is that he was learning, he practiced it the right way. And it was probably beneficial to him because sometimes that other way is very regimented and it forces you to think in a way where maybe you're not integrating as many tools as you should be into your game. And I think that sometimes the freedom to do that may create, I play a couple of musical instruments, and I'm trying to continue to learn. And I have the privilege to be able to work with a couple of really good professional players. And when they talk about how they practiced or what they did to practice or what some of the great recording artists did to practice, it's often way different than what you hear about in school or from a lot of private lesson teachers. And part of it is because they were, again, they listened to themselves and how they learn and figured out ways to construct what they needed to work on for themselves. And sometimes because they didn't have the privilege to take from top end people, maybe they actually learned better that way. Kind of the way Patrick Mahomes integrated being a shortstop into being a quarterback. Sometimes when you have the freedom to do that, suddenly it all clicks together.
Right. I'm really interested in everything you have to say about this skill development because it seems like it's really, really important. And it seems like coaches should be the primary driver of skill development. But you argue in RSP that that's definitely not the case. And you have a very interesting example about Tony Gonzalez, Hall of Fame caliber tight end, that was dropping a lot of footballs. And it wasn't the coaches that helped him, right? Like he had to kind of put in the work outside of practice, right? He had to get the reps in. So what's interesting to me is, it sounds like Richardson has maybe figured things out on his own. I mean, I guess we don't really know for sure. Whereas it feels like Will Levis has some really easily fixable things in terms of his footwork, but either he's not getting the coaching or he's ignoring that coaching, right?
Well, there's a couple things. Like the footwork's probably easy enough. If you really work at it over the next year or two, you should be able to get better at that. The processing of information, which is so key to being on time and accurate and making the correct read, and then moving in a pocket where you've got 300 pounders coming at you and you're taking hits the force of car accidents. Those are two difficult things to be able to get better at if you're not already good at them now. So I would argue that. But with Richardson, it's funny. I actually get a chance to supply some quarterback evaluations along with, I believe it's QB school, JT O'Sullivan, to a guy by the name of Will Hewlett. And Will Hewlett is a quarterback coach, and he works with high school, college, and pro players. He's Drew Bledsoe's son, who's in high school. He's worked with him. He's worked with a number of different guys. He's usually the guy that's helping get lower end players drafted in the college level. Brock Purdy was one of his clients last year, and I supplied scouting reports to him. Anthony Richardson is one of his clients this year. And I supplied my scouting report in December, and I've had Will on my show a number of times. It doesn't benefit me to give Will Hewlett a good evaluation just because I'm supplying reports to him. I mean, it benefits Will that I'm being honest about what I see. And so later on, after I had already finished my evaluations and then finished all my grading of all the quarterbacks and found out that I had Anthony Richardson number one by a reasonable margin, I asked Will back in March, I'm like, so what was it like working with him? Just out of curiosity, I'd love to add something in my report if it's easily to be able to, something that's worthwhile to add. And he told me he's an elite learner, that his translating from the whiteboard to the field is unlike anything that he's worked with players. And he's not just worked with high school and college talent. He's also done some work last year in the offseason with Trevor Lawrence. So, he's also working with some of the highest end talents that are in the NFL and being able to do that. So he knows what he's looking at. And he's part of the QB collective with guys like Sean McVay and Mike Shanahan, who are part of that. He's a respected guy. So, the difference in learning with coaches is that coaches teach, and this is what NFL and college guys have told me, that when they hear me talk about this, I get emails sometimes of thank yous, or validation, because what they're doing is saying, thank you for explaining that to people, because coaches in college only have a certain amount of time per week to work with players. And that time is devoted to scheme and game plan. In the NFL, it's the same thing. It's not that they only have so much time allotted to them by the NCAA. They're not dictated by anything, but there's only so much time that they can devote to game plans that are much more complex. So they expect players to come in and be ready to execute to the scheme. And that means that anything that a player needs to work on, they're going to work on their own. And if you go to a practice, you're going to see lots of fundamental drills. And you're going to look at those drills and we'll see they're working on it. But if you've ever practiced anything in your life, you know that 3 reps on a drill in 5 minutes isn't going to help you get better by doing that, just once a day or 2 times a week or even 3 or 4 times a week. You've got to put in maybe 15 to 20 dedicated minutes on one thing, and then leave that be and go to something else and do that for weeks, months, years to do that. And so, a guy like Gonzalez, he figured out after leading the league in drops in year 2, he told Bill Belichick and Chris Collinsworth in the NFL's top 100 of all time that he finally started to get over the hump of what it meant to be a really good player by creating his own methodologies for working on catching passes and employing coaches and assistants and quality control guys on his team in Kansas City before and after practice to drill this every day with him, and then also working on it on his own time. And then hiring your own coaches for development of techniques and concepts. And players usually learn from other players and then start implementing that stuff. So if you're a top professional, it's like keeping up with trade journals or taking extra classes and learning new things. When you go to your job, they may enroll you in something, but it's usually something basic. If they want you to really learn something, if you really need to learn something to get better, you got to do it on your own. It's the same thing in the NFL.
That's fascinating. We do have this huge offseason in both the college and the pro game, right? So, why aren't college coaches spending all spring repping whatever a wide receiver needs?
They got to recruit. They got to recruit. I know what you're asking, and it makes sense. But players tell me all the time, they're like and also there's only so much complexity that they can deal with. They're trying to get the best athletes. They basically have 2 extremes, and this is the extremes. There's always an area in the middle, but there's one extreme, which is let's get the best athlete and just try and win as many games as possible by having them, run over, run around, jump over, jump through. And then there's also, in these positions, we can sacrifice the athletic ability if we have someone who's just really smart with the game and can handle a lot. But most players aren't quite at that level. And most defenses, and that's why most defenses at the college game are a little more basic than the NFL. NFL disguises coverages with way more sophistication than what you see in the college game. Yes, they still both leagues run cover 2 and cover 3 in quarters, but the way they disguise it, the way they show one maybe, or they play on one side of the field, they're playing a zone, and on the other side of the field, they're playing man. Or high, they're playing zone. Low, they're playing man. And then they do different things with blitz packages and different looks that really confuse quarterbacks and make them think, or wide receivers and make them think, because they have to be on the same page. Romeo Doubs is a great example of last year of what's the difference between college and pro. In college, very productive, deep threat receiver, big play guy. Once he entered the pros during the preseason, everybody's on him. Oh, he looks great. He's making big plays every week. And it's all those plays, if you notice, are one-on-one, man-to-man coverage, going up and winning in drills. And then as the season progressed, in the preseason, at least in August, and he started facing other defenses and they started playing more zone, or they played man with a little bit, it was a little tighter because now these defenders were a little more savvy because he's facing first team guys on other teams. Now he's dropping passes or struggling to catch them cleanly. And next thing you know, by the end of August, Aaron Rodgers is telling the media, these young receivers need to get on the same page with me, or else they're not really going to get as much playing time. And we got to get that together because they're not. And what he meant is they're not understanding which routes to run and where to settle, or what adjustments to make based on the coverage late pre-snap, early post-snap. And that's when you suddenly start seeing Sammy Watkins making plays over and over again late in the preseason, because a veteran understands those things. The rookies don't, and it takes time. And that's why Romeo Doubs started reasonably strong and then kind of faded and really wasn't a fantasy thing last year, because Devontae Adams said it too. He said beating defenders wasn't hard. Running routes, the physical act of that, being an athlete was easy coming in the NFL. It took me 3 years to figure out how to actually use all of that to be on the same page with my quarterback so that I could actually be a reliable receiver for my quarterback. That's what took me 3 years.
Right. All right. There's so much stuff to unpack there. Let's first go back to this notion in college that some coaches are just trying to recruit the best athletes. I presume these are going to be the bigger programs. And then versus, the guys that are willing to think the game, willing to put in the work. I presume at the college level, there's a wide variety of approaches, right?
Absolutely. There's a wider variety than there is the NFL.
Okay. So, but when we get into the NFL, what's your sense of raw talent versus hard work, right? Like you've been evaluating these players for so long, right? So you get a sense for, at a very basic level, let's call things like speed and quickness, like somewhat innate talents, right? I know they can be worked on, and then some of the other skills, some of the other skills that you talk about.
Processing,
processing, like the stuff we talked about, quarterbacks already, things that you need to put in the work. So, maybe give me a sense for how you think of, whether talent or hard work is more important in making it in the NFL. Does that matter with position, or can we take some general takeaways?
Sure. It's funny, there's, it depends on the position, but we can give you some basics. But I would say that you need to have a certain baseline of physical talents that can only be improved marginally if they're not already where they are right now, speed, quickness, acceleration, all that. Then there are certain techniques usually with daily work, and in the same way that if you floss your teeth every day and you brush your teeth, you're going to have a clean mouth. If you only do it once a week, or you do it every so often, over time, you're going to see the effects of that not really work out there for you. It's the same thing with technique. Technique takes work to refine that. Then there's conceptual skills, which that's kind of the final frontier of what we're trying to figure out, which is how long does it take? Is it something that, some players, especially quarterbacks, once they hit their 30s, if they can make it to their 30s, sometimes it clicks and the game slows down because they've seen enough now for them to integrate it. Maybe not as quickly as you would like, but suddenly now Alex Smith in his 30s was a much better quarterback than the struggling guy picked first overall. And then there's some guys who, but at the same time, then there's some guys like Brett Favre who didn't understand what nickel was. But even though he threw a lot of interceptions and he didn't understand until year 2, he literally created the RPO. Like, he literally was the one who was like, if we did this, if they're doing this in practice, what if I actually do this? What if I fake like I'm doing? And, because that's again,
so funny.
Yeah. I mean, people think of him as like, you can think all you want of him off the field, and we're not going to talk about him off the field.
Yeah, please no.
But on the field, the guy was an incredibly smart quarterback who just played a higher risk friendly form of football because he had the physical skills, but he also saw the field well. He read leverage well. So even though he couldn't describe to you what a nickel was, it's the same way, like, I'll put it this way, like a jazz musician when they improvise. I often use these examples, but there are tons of musicians out there who can't read, like classical musicians. They can't tell you what the time signature says or how many flats or sharps are there in an A flat, concert, or, do counterpoint or anything like that. But they spent years and years and years literally listening to recordings and learning how to play them back so that their ear is so good that they can literally just play back whatever you hear, even the most complex stuff that would look like bug defecation on a page. If you put it on there, it's unbelievable. And that's kind of the game of football, is that, there's a certain level of being able to see and process and integrate information that comes with on playing time. So that's the hard part, is like, you have to have some classroom and then enough playing time for it to click. So when it comes to talent and work with quarterback, you have to have that right combination of work for the techniques and for the concepts, but enough talent with the arm and the athletic ability and then the talent and the mind to integrate everything together. That's why it's the hardest position in sport. Defensive end, for example, you need the talent to be able to bend your hips. You need the talent to be able to have the acceleration, which comes with a certain level of work. But again, diminishing returns after a certain point. You either got it or you don't. And then they find, like Justice Mosqueda, who we know is a good analytics writer in the space, will tell you that it's one of the few positions that you can take a raw athlete and say, in 3 years, we can make you a decent pass rusher if you have the right athletic matrix. Running back, people say that with, but they're learning now, which I've been espousing for years through S2, is that, Chris Spielman was talking about, former Giants GM. The closer you are to the middle of the field, the more you have to process information. So centers, running backs, quarterbacks, guards, they have to process a lot of information. So running backs who run to the outside a lot, like in Mike Shanahan's offense, let's take Christian McCaffrey out of it because he can do anything. But like Elijah Mitchell, Jerick McKinnon, Tevin Coleman, when you're just running outside and it's like, this is the one crease you have to hit, you don't have to process a lot. You're just hitting a crease. You're following your blockers. If you're running inside or if you're running zone a lot, you have to process a lot more. So it's about footwork combinations, things like that. So I would say like wide receiver, because they work in the middle of the field when they break across the middle, is more of a middle of the field, the position than it looks, So depending on how they're used. Tight end, more middle of the field. You have to process information more. Running back, same thing if you're running inside rather than outside. Quarterback, those are ones that need that right combination. But again, it's the baseline of physical skills, and then certain baseline techniques. They don't have to be the prettiest. They just have to be effective. And then it's, so it's kind of a jumbled mess. I know I probably didn't answer it the way you wished, but it's still an ongoing thing. And I don't think we're ever going to solve it.
Well, but this this gives a lot of insight. Okay, so here are my take-home messages. So first, I don't have the physical ability to play in the NFL, so that's great. We've established that. We're all good with that. But at the next level, okay, so first the changes between different positions, and completely like get that the edge rusher, maybe there's less, processing integration and all the super difficult stuff. I guess one of my conclusions, for the general public, right? They're just like, football, elite athletes, right? And even when I think about sports, American football probably depends on your athleticism more than roughly more than, certainly more than like soccer.
Okay.
I would say. But I would also say that from what you just said, I think a conclusion is that we don't put enough importance on the mental aspect of the game. And that's everything that you just talked about in terms of how you need to process information in the middle of the field, right? Yeah. Is that a good...
I would say that's absolutely correct. You look at Cordell Patterson as an example. He was a receiver, beginning his career, one of the best open field runners I ever have scouted at any position. And, they tried for years to make him a receiver, but he couldn't handle that mental transition to the game. He was kind of late in the middle of the field, the way Alex Smith was late in the middle of the field, but just as a receiver. When they said, you know what, we're going to make you a gap runner in the backfield and run toss, and you just follow this guy. And once you get through the hole, then you can do what you do best. Right. Suddenly, look what he did in his 30s. Right. That's a perfect example of, why those takeaways you had apply.
Right. So, with the elite athletes, it sounds like if you can get them outside, kind of like you talk about with Josh Allen, right? They simplified the offense after his first year, asked them to make fewer reads. Things got a lot better for him, right? So if you have an explosive athlete, make it simpler with these toss plays where you just follow the blocker, right? That's how they can succeed.
That can be the case for certain players, and that means that you just need. There's always a give and take, and part of the give and take is that if for instance in this era of football where defenses are lighter because they have safeties disguised as linebackers and they're trying to stop spread offenses from throwing deep, now you have the advantage of saying if you have bigger, stronger athletes, you can run the ball on them, but it means that you have to have a good offensive line that can be athletic enough to run those plays, because now the onus is on the offensive line more than it is on the running back. If you're running inside and running more zone plays, now the onus is just as much on the running back, if not more, than on the offensive line, because he has to help set up blockers. And so that's the difference, is one's doing a little bit more conceptual work than the other. And then the other team, and there's that balance between line and running back of who's doing that.
Right. When you talk about wide receivers and RSP, I was kind of blown away by, it seems like there is as broad a list of skills for wide receivers as there is for quarterbacks. So many different aspects of their game. And getting back to what we were talking about, if you do have the explosive athlete, is there a way to put a wide receiver just on the outside, running mostly deep routes, things like that? Or is wide receiver so complicated? Or do you have to scheme for that? Like, are there ways to take advantage of an explosive athlete?
Absolutely. Mike Wallace was a good example. Ted Ginn, those are guys that certainly have that opportunity, who got those opportunities. But part of it is that you need to have, it's a combination of, you need a player with enough speed that they can be a matchup advantage against almost any cornerback that they're facing. And that means that in order to get that matchup one-on-one, you need to have other players who command enough respect from the defense that the defense has to move that safety in away from any area that he can cover the receiver, that he can get back to that and help out the cornerback who's covering that fast receiver. So you can use guys like that. And certainly the more talent you have around you, the more you can find one or two guys who maybe do one thing really well, or two things really well, like run fast or run well in the open field, and you can leverage them. Kenny Golladay is a good example of a player who, ran fast, jumped high, and could make catches against tight coverage. And he wasn't a great route runner, but in Detroit, he had his best years because you had a great route runner in Marvin Jones, who also was one of the best contested catch receivers in the game statistically for at least one or two of his years, and could play multiple positions. Then you also had Golden Tate, who was a fantastic runner after the catch, who could win deep, but was also in that realm of that, like, you had two guys on the outside or in different areas of the field, wherever you put them, who could play multiple positions and force the top defender to play those guys. And what that means is when you use three receivers and two of them were that good, that commanded at least a certain level of respect, then there wasn't a third cornerback good enough who was going to be physically good enough to handle a tall, fast receiver like Golladay. And if it wasn't a cornerback, it was a linebacker or a safety. And they could just say, run in a straight line against this linebacker, and we're throwing it up to you. And he had he did more than that. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but he had a lot more plays like that. And then when you come to New York and you're like, you're the man, or Gabriel Davis. Gabriel Davis is a better example against the Chiefs 2 years ago. Everybody was like, look at was it 3 touchdowns? Well, the Chiefs specifically, and I've shown this on tape, is the Chiefs specifically played a coverage where what they were hoping is that they could get to Josh Allen and sack him before he could reach Gabriel Davis as his second or third read on the field. If they won, then, if the Chiefs won, they sacked him or prevented him from being able to hit Davis. But Davis was on slower developing routes in the middle of the field, hoping to work behind safeties or linebackers or nickel corners. And when Josh Allen would escape the rush and work outside, Davis got behind people and he was able to throw it to him. But it wasn't Davis winning the route as much as it was Davis having the time to work past coverage with just in a straight line on a slower developing route as the second or third read, and Allen doing the bulk of the work to be able to access that passing lane because of what the Chiefs' coverage was. But people looked at that and said, heading into last year, Gabriel Davis is a future primary wide receiver in the NFL. And I think we've seen right now that, there's still some people saying he's going to have a bounce back year. But I think most people in fantasy realize that he's a good NFL player, but he's not a top 12 talent who can, win every route.
Right. In RSP, you talk about kind of breadth versus depth of talent, right? So do you want to be good at like a lot of things, or do you want to be particularly good at a couple of things? In general, for wide receivers, let's say you're a wide receiver and your goal is kind of to make the most money, have the most longevity. Do you want to have like a breadth of talent or a depth of talent?
You want to have a breadth of talent that's deep.
Okay.
So that's probably, like Jamar Chase, where you can play all three positions. You can win deep. You can win after the catch. You can win in the middle of the field against contact. You can win against tight coverage. Because in order to have a long career, maybe as your speed declines and you're no longer used as a split end against the Jalen Ramseys of the world, or whoever the top cornerback you want to mention is, maybe he can move over to being a flanker or a slot, kind of like, say, Anquan Bolden moved from flanker to slot and became a big slot player, or Larry Fitzgerald moved from, a flanker to a big slot and extended his career. The more things you can do at a high level, the more that you're going to be a factor as a starter in the game. Now, that said, there's another corollary to that, which is the exception to that rule is if you're Ted Ginn, who has unbelievable speed and you're still one of the fastest people on the field in your mid-30s, and they're like, listen, we just need a guy who can stretch the field and legitimately do that well enough that it helps the rest of our offense in what we're trying to do, then you can be a great specialist that way and have that career. So
Sure.
it's, yeah. So
it's tough. I mean, it sounds like there's a ton of luck involved, right? Getting signed by the right team for the right amount of money. I mean, it's not like a case where you can, in general, have this breadth of skills and then focus on a particular skill based on the scheme that you're asked to do, whether that's being the primary receiver or the third receiver.
It's tough for the guys in between, and that's where most of the guys are. Like if you're, so as a result of that, where you scheme fit is going to be valuable, because if the team runs a lot of crossing routes and on, just straight line type of routes, and you can catch the ball well, that's great. If you land on that team, maybe you're going to be, maybe you'll have an opportunity there. But then again, there's a lot of other guys who have those baseline skills as well. But like certain things, the issue is that there are really 3 to 5 different sub roles of wide receivers in the NFL. And the type, there's the X, the player who runs the deep routes outside most of the time, the flanker who's more of running the timing routes where you're getting, yardage after the catch and reliant to do that. The slot, who is really kind of the guy who has to work against a lot of the zone coverage in the middle of the field and be almost, be really strong at working with the quarterback and making adjustments. And there are players who work all points in between. I mean, Michael Thomas plays a lot of flanker and slot. Juju Smith-Schuster is the same way. You'll have guys like Steve Smith, who you can move around the formation back in the day and do everything, or Stephon Diggs, who can play all 3 positions like that, or Tyreek Hill. And so what that means is that with all these different sub roles, some players can make a living if they find the right offense to match up their skills. Say, for instance, there's a guy like by the name of Jonathan Mingo in this draft, who is a bigger, stronger player who played on the wing like a tight end against Ole Miss, but he's built like a tall wide receiver. He can win on the outside, but you could see how an offense might decide that we really want a player who can help us block like a second tight end to help our running game, because our scheme emphasizes that. But we also can match him up as a receiver because we know he's got the speed, and we can match him up against a safety or a linebacker and win deep this way. But we can also split him out traditionally like an outside receiver, and he can win against a normal cornerback, like a good NFL cornerback. So that combination of tools can be really helpful to an offense. But some offenses that can help. Some offenses, they're like, we're not going to play a lot of this style of football. So sure. That's why it's complicated.
Well, right. And then maybe you drafted Jonathan Mingo because he fits your scheme, and then the coaching staff gets fired next year.
Ding.
And Mingo is now in a scheme that doesn't fit his skills, yep. Right? Which is, yeah.
Yeah, you're like Robert Woods. Robert Woods joins the Bills, is a slot receiver. Not really used to the potential that he had, kind of hidden in the mix. Winds up with Sean Payton. The way they used him was perfect, and he was a Pro Bowl caliber wide receiver.
Yeah, so much to chew on. Matt Waldman, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Please let everyone know where they can get the RSP and sure. Where else to find you on the internet.
Sure. MattWaldman.com is where you can buy the RSP. MattWaldmanRSP.com. You can get it through that, but you can see all my work there. Matt Waldman's RSP Film Room on YouTube. It's been, I have over 600 episodes, I believe, studying and breaking down film, building a video glossary of terms so that you can see in that. And Matt Waldman's RSP Cast, which is a variety of podcasts under that umbrella, talking with scouts and analytics people like Adam Harstead, or back in the past, Dwayne McFarland, folks like that. And then, talking about scouting and fantasy football as well. You can find that pretty much any outlet that you get your podcast.
Awesome. Any new projects on the horizon for the upcoming year? Or?
Really the only new project is this ongoing one of a video, audio, written glossary of scouting terms that I'll be working on probably for the next couple of years, so that people can just, when they look at it, they can just look at it in any fashion they want to, using pros and college players as examples.
Yeah, I feel like last year we talked a lot about the it factor, iterated technique and integrated technique, right?
Yeah.
And then this year, I feel like I'm reading more about like intuition and confidence.
Yeah.
When you're talking about.
To me, it's the same thing. It's all part of the umbrella. It's just trying to break it down a little bit more and gradually get to uncover what that is.
Right, exactly. And so this glossary is going to kind of help a reader like me understand that stuff.
I think so.
Matt, thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
This is Ed Fang. I'm honored to be your host for the Football Analytics Show. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Matt Waldman as much as I did. Matt and I come at football from completely different perspectives, yet we always have a great time chatting about the intricacies of his work. I think he's a fascinating guy. I think he's done so many fascinating things. And if you want to win at betting on football, it's really important to understand the game from many, many different angles. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting newsletter. You can sign up for that at thepowerrank.com. The Football Analytics Show is also supported by listeners like you. There are a bunch of very kind and generous people that donate on patreon.com. If you decide to donate to support this podcast, you get a premium episode every month. Last month's episode was on the wisdom of crowds and just how crazy accurate it is at predicting the entire NFL season. Over the next 3 months, the premium podcasts are going to be my predictions for the upcoming 2023 college football and NFL season. Some of this content is probably going to see the light of day at some point, either on this podcast, the public part of it, or the newsletter. But if you want to get in on that information when it first comes out, you can support the podcast on Patreon. To learn more, go to patreon.com/footballanalytics. Patreon is Patreon. Football Analytics is all one word. Once again, that's patreon.com/footballanalytics. Once again, my name is Ed Fang, your host for the Football Analytics Show, and I will talk to you again soon.